We all expect police officers to protect and serve their local community, and to keep us all safe from danger. And while many of those live up to our standards, we do occasionally see the odd rogue cop. Stephen Zelich was one of those, and after resigning from his role after a few concerning encounters, his behaviour would descend into darker habits. Habits that began in the lustful corners of the internet, and would end in murder. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening folks. My name is Adrian, and welcome back to another video by Coffeehouse Crime. Today we're looking at the horrors of the Wisconsin Suitcase Murderer. Now this case contains several interesting aspects, including a rogue police officer, mental health, the BDSM community, and internet surveillance. And just to let you know that I post true crime and strange cases here weekly, so if you haven't yet, please consider subscribing to Coffeehouse Crime. Now with that said, please grab yourself a coffee and take a seat. This is the case of Stephen Zelich. Good morning, America. For our story today, we're focusing on the two northern states of Minnesota and Wisconsin. The two states share very similar qualities. They are dotted with small lakes, look out onto Lake Superior, are shrouded by old green forests, and get very cold in the winter. This probably comes as no surprise to those who live nearby, but Wisconsin and Minnesota have always had some form of rivalry, and this competitive behaviour ranges from American football right down to who has the most lakes. Minnesota currently holds that title, and is affectionately dubbed the land of 10,000 lakes. And Minnesotans are very proud of it, so much so that it's on the bottom of the state's number plates. On the other hand, Wisconsin proudly boasts miles of beaches, waterfalls, and dense forests. The state contains plenty of sights for sore eyes, so if we're talking natural beauty, which one do you think takes the crown? Please let me know in the comments section down below. For today's case, we're zeroing in on the small city of Farmington, found on the northern edge of Minnesota's largest city, Minneapolis. And it's here that we meet 37-year-old Laura Simonson. Laura was a single mother to 7 children, consisting of 5 daughters and 2 sons, which from the very get-go is a challenging situation at best. And although she and her former husband had split childcare, it was still a very difficult predicament to be in. Unfortunately, this also meant that those whom Laura loved the most, her children, were often far away. She was alone for most of the time, and although she had other family members to lean on, Laura still felt that cold paternal isolation. Understandably, this took a toll on her mental health, and during this time, she was diagnosed with moderate depression and began to take medication to help her. To add to the family's troubles, she had a 13-year-old daughter who required far more care than the rest of her siblings, as sadly, Alyssa was involved in a swimming accident resulting in permanent brain damage. She passed away shortly after her 13th birthday, which is something that Laura never truly got over. To remember and reflect on her daughter's death, she would go on to have her name and birthday tattooed on her ankle. Following this, Laura's depression spiraled even further. She had already struggled with custodial and parental issues, but losing one of her babies pushed her over the edge. Now, everyone grieves differently, and Laura, she stopped talking to her family after this. During this time frame, nobody knew where she was. But reconnecting with her family several months later, she seemed happier and had regained control of her mental health. It seemed that her time away had served her well. However, very little did they know that Laura was finding solace and validation in a rather flirty way. She had created several accounts on various dating and hookup websites, with the intention to meet strangers online for sex and affection. And once her family learned of this, they of course grew concerned. They didn't know if this new lifestyle was safe for her, but Laura assured them that there was nothing to worry about. She was supposedly taking plenty of precautions. They left her to carry on with whatever she was doing, as after all, she seemed to be in a happier place. And although this carried on without any problems for quite some time, that would all change on November 2nd, 2013, when, out of the blue, Laura's mother, Mary, came across a handwritten note. This note, which Laura left behind, said that she was leaving her family and children behind as she didn't want to burden them. It also mentioned that she loved her family and her children dearly, and that she had left on her very own accord. Now, it wasn't uncommon for Laura to disappear for a few days, especially since embarking on a new online life, and at first her family thought this was just another one of those cases. Laura would always return to her children. The love she had for them was indestructible, and she would never just abandon them. However, when the hours turned into days and then into weeks, and Laura still hadn't contacted her family, they of course began to worry. On November the 22nd, which was 3 weeks since her disappearance, Mary's concerns came to a boiling point when she received a second note through the door. The note was from one of Laura's friends, Jeff Madison. She had met him online and they'd always remained just friends. And Jeff approached Mary because he was worried. He hadn't heard from Laura in more than several weeks, which was strange because they always kept in contact. And so, with mounting concern from friends, and her silence now approaching 3 weeks, Mary decided it was finally time to report her disappearance to police. And with that said, the great search for Laura Simonson officially began. Police officers had no idea where to start. Laura had left her van at her mum's house, and upon checking inside, police found her phone and bank cards in there too. Which was strange, because with no money or phone, how would she keep herself afloat? As always, a missing persons case usually begins with questioning those closest to the missing person. From this, officers can learn when and where they were last seen, and discover any outstanding details. But after talking to those closest to Laura, which included her ex-husband, nothing substantial came to light. Her ex had a rock-solid alibi, no peculiar details were uncovered, and nobody appeared to be suspicious. Weeks hardened into months, and sadly, Laura's children missed out on time with their mother over Christmas. Their sadness weighed heavy on Jeff's heart, and so, with that said, the man decided to spearhead his own investigation. You see, Jeff lived in a very technological world. He was proficient with computers, knew his way around the internet, and thought of himself as somewhat of a web sleuth. And with his backdoor knowledge of the internet, he wondered if he could perhaps play a key role in finding Laura. Now, police don't often take wild suggestions from keyboard warriors, but with Jeff's knowledge and emotional investment, it was definitely worth looking into. And so, shoulder to shoulder, authorities began to look into Laura's online history with his assistance. What they found painted a very curious picture of Laura's life after her daughter had died. She had found respite in the online world of BDSM, an acronym for bondage, discipline, sadism, and masochism. BDSM explores many avenues around those 4 fundamental dynamics, but there are also many other behavioral, psychological, and social aspects too. And just to throw it out there, but there is much more than its stereotypical misconception of pain equals good. Despite its many variations and subgenres, there is one resounding rule throughout the BDSM community, and that's trust, mutual respect, and care. We've all heard of couples using the safe word as an example, but to practice BDSM, you must respect all partners and their conditions. Anyway, authorities realized that there was one username that she frequently contacted, and that user went by the name of Mr. Handcuffs. Mr. Handcuffs was relatively affluent in the BDSM scene. He actually had several profiles on more than a dozen BDSM sites, ranging from old pages like collarspace.com to other websites such as thailandsexy.com. His profile image and details seemed to always be the same. He claimed that he wanted a no-questions-asked slave for long-term or permanent captivity, to do nothing but serve and be physically and mentally bound. Now, Jeff had already done his research on the so-called Mr. Handcuffs, and being the web sleuth that he was, he found that the emails linked to all of those accounts belonged to a man who went by the name of Stephen Zelich. Stephen was a 52-year-old ex-police officer with a very shady past. He was hired by the Mequon Police Department, but resigned 5 years later in 1989 to become a West Allis Police Department patrol officer. 12 years later in 2001, but Stephen once again resigned from his job, and this time it was due to a messy altercation with a woman, one he had randomly met at a bar before taking her back to his place. You see, Stephen would often hit up strip clubs while on the job, and while there, he would often use his police officer occupation to his advantage, mostly hoping he would impress women and take them home. I'm not sure how successful he was, but one of them clearly didn't enjoy her time. She followed the man back home, but only a few hours later, she was seen running away naked from his house, screaming and begging for help. And after reporting his behaviour to the police, the department would have a very awkward internal conversation.
Do you think you did anything wrong?
I had no, absolutely not.
You grabbed her.
Right.
Okay.
It was an attempt to retrieve the money.
Right, and to get your money back, you grabbed her. Where'd you grab?
Around the throat area, or neck area, I should say, back in the neck area, and her wrist.
My concern is your conduct inside your apartment and in the hallway of your apartment.
I don't feel I did anything wrong at all.
The woman told police that he had body slammed and choked her on the floor, but when he went to grab his handcuffs, she sprinted out of the apartment as fast as she could. Over the following weeks, several other women complained about Stephen's behaviour. He had apparently stalked them, which included unsolicited traffic stops and gathering their personal information. However, before authorities could do anything about it, Stephen actually resigned from his role before any investigation could be completed. Stephen's long-term relationships would go on to claim that he liked to cage women up for days, months, and even years at a time, often leaving them for hours every day. Now, Jeff was so adamant that Stephen had something to do with Laura's disappearance that he leaked Jeff's phone number and address to the public and asked them to harass him. Officers did actually interview Stephen in March of 2014. The man confirmed that he knew of Laura, but also claimed that he never actually met her.
How did you come to know her?
Well, just online.
We're just here to try to see if we can get any info. You knew her.
Well, you know, and I cringe. I understand there was some. I didn't know her. I mean, that's even stretching it a bit. I don't really know her.
And you indicated that she did want to try to meet.
I think she wanted to meet. I think there was some inference in conversation, mostly on her part. But I don't. I had no intention of meeting.
You had no intention of meeting?
No.
Why?
Just because it was really just interesting, fun, recreation, conversation online. That's really what it is.
Stephen, what would you say, if I asked you for a sample of your DNA, would you be willing to offer it to me?
Yes.
However, the police were not able to take him into custody, as at this moment in time, there was no proof to suggest he was involved in her disappearance. But that would all change when, all of a sudden, a circumstantial discovery came into the spotlight. In June of 2014, 7 months after Laura had disappeared, government employees were conducting routine work on the roads of Wisconsin, more specifically at a site near Lake Geneva. The work included cutting grass around the roads and performing general maintenance. But on this fateful day, these workers came across something rather unexpected. Along a rural road, they discovered 2 suitcases. They were covered with flies, and the smell that came from them was horrendous. Before even touching the suitcases, the workers knew they were dealing with something much more than just usual fly tipping. They therefore decided to alert the police immediately. After opening them up, forensic officers could see a hand emerging from a black bin bag. The hand appeared to be mummified, and their death was certainly not recent. Exploring further, officers learned they were not dealing with just a single death. They found that each suitcase contained the body of a woman. Both women had their hands bound behind their backs with rope, and one of them had a ball gag in their mouth, commonly used for bondage.
The I-Team is looking into a gruesome mystery tonight involving 2 suitcases found on the side of a rural road near Lake Geneva in Wisconsin. Bodies were found inside of the suitcases.
Very surprised. I'm in shock, like everybody on the street. It doesn't happen here.
You know, you just don't expect this ever to happen here.
This would be the first time that I've come across bodies that were found inside suitcases. It's a horrible, horrible crime, but that we're going to work real hard, and you know, I have a lot of confidence in the investigators that they're going to be able to put some of these pieces together.
Investigators in southern Wisconsin tonight say it does not appear that the victims were murdered where the suitcases were found. They say it is likely they were killed elsewhere and dumped along the road. The town of Geneva police chief tells us they are checking missing persons reports in and near Walworth County, but until there are autopsy details, the answers will be slow in coming. Quite an unusual case.
I would say so. All right, Chuck.
Upon further examination, they found several identifying features on the bodies, one of which was a name and date on the ankle, which of course belonged to Alyssa. And after contacting Farmington Police Department, they were able to link the body to Laura Simonson. She had at long last been found. But this didn't figure out who the other body belonged to. Police had no solid leads, and due to the state of her body, they could only guess what she had looked like. So this is actually what caught my attention to the case, because her facial construction is one of the strangest images I've ever seen. Upon the release of this image, and alongside a photo of Laura, authorities reached out to the public for any information that could potentially solve what happened to these women. Not long after this, they received a phone call, which came from the manager of a microtel in Rochester. The manager informed police that she believed Laura had checked into the hotel on the 2nd of November that previous year. She distinctly remembered her because Laura appeared to be very meek and uncomfortable. She wasn't alone either. To her side while checking in was a man no other than Stephen Zelich, the exact man that Jeff was concerned about. Unfortunately, by the time the manager had contacted the police, the surveillance footage for this day had already been overwritten. But in a stroke of contrasting luck, footage from the next day was still recoverable. The surveillance footage showed Stephen checking out alone without Laura, and to add to this, he had a trolley full of suitcases, which supposedly was way too many for just one person. Now, this opened up many other questions to authorities. For example, what happened to Laura in that hotel room? Where did she disappear to? And was she in one of those suitcases? Police were also keen to find out the other woman's identity, and when she failed to match any missing police reports, they turned to dental records for a clue. And through their extensive research, a match was finally found. The body was identified to belong to 19-year-old Jenny Gamez. Jenny had a troubled upbringing. She lost her parents at a very young age, and was thrown from foster family to foster family throughout her childhood years. Despite this, she had a bubbly and cheerful personality and thrived throughout her education. The young woman graduated from Kennedy Alternative High School with an honours degree in 2011, and although Jenny was academically gifted, this didn't mean that she was always happy. In 2008, and while she was still a teenager, she accidentally fell pregnant. And sadly, due to her age and the inability to care for her child while she was in foster care herself, the baby's father gained full custody instead. Jenny left her foster home in mid-2012, where she then moved to California to live with her friends. And slowly, over time, Jenny fell out of contact with her foster parent Lorraine Erickson. She then slowly distanced herself from her friends, until eventually all contact ceased. Lorraine was concerned when she realized that Jenny had vanished. She was vigilant with strangers, sensible with dating, and always kept to people her age. And when she learned that Jenny was dead, tied up in a suitcase alongside another victim, it came as devastating news to her and all those who knew her. Following the suitcases and surveillance footage, Stephen was arrested on 2 counts of concealing a corpse, and after this, it didn't take long for him to crumble under the pressure, therefore revealing the dark underbelly of him and his 2 victims' lives. You see, Stephen had been frequenting several BDSM websites for many years. Not to the point of being a healthy outlet, but more like a dark obsession. Every one of his profiles had the same picture of him, with the man smugly sitting on a white sofa, followed up with a profile description that highlighted his twisted desires. For example, his profile at ThailandSexy.com described his need for a 24/7 slave to succumb to his every whim. He wanted a slave that enjoyed being tied up, gagged, and caged. He further wanted to control every aspect of their lives and be the only person they could talk to. This is why, during his independent investigations, Jeff believed he was keeping Laura locked up as a hostage in his own home. And so, after Stephen's arrest and interrogation, authorities learned what happened to Laura and Jenny. Stephen's version of events is as follows. In the autumn of 2012, Jenny created herself a profile on several dating sites, including those catered for various kinks. And it's here that she made contact with Stephen Zelich on the site Master B Slave Club. Stephen had posted on this website, seeking someone who was looking for no limit, no release enslavement. It was around this time that Jenny moved to California, and in late 2012 through the early months of 2013, Jenny and Stephen met multiple times to engage in BDSM play. He eventually convinced her to stay with him as his permanent caged slave. However, Stephen claims that during this time of heavy bondage play, he lost control and took things a step too far. The pair engaged in breath play, an activity which involves restricting someone's breathing. Stephen claims they did this by tying a rope around Jenny's neck and tightening it as their session continued. Things then supposedly got out of hand, which resulted in Jenny suffocating to her death. In a panic, Stephen placed her naked body into black bags and stored her in his apartment freezer, where she would then stay for several months. But this tragic ending to Jenny's life didn't seem to faze him all that much, as soon after this, he was back on several BDSM websites looking for a new partner. And of course, that's when, in the winter of 2013, Stephen made first contact with Laura on a website called collarspace.com. The pair agreed to meet at a microtel in Rochester on November the 2nd, which of course was the same day she had left a note for her mother. Later that evening, the pair checked into their hotel before they headed up to their room to engage in their planned activities. Much like his recent altercation with Jenny, Stephen suggested they engage in breath play. With her hands already cuffed behind her back and her mouth gagged, Stephen then tied a rope around her defenseless neck. Showing no care or control, and with Laura unable to tell him it was too much, she then became his second victim to die from asphyxiation. After her death, Stephen emptied one of their suitcases, curled her body snugly inside, and then headed to bed, sleeping in the same room with her body in the suitcase. He then checked out in the morning with the suitcases on his trolley. Upon returning to his apartment, he realized that his freezer was already too full with the remains of Jenny Gamez. He therefore decided to store Laura's body elsewhere. But as the days turned into weeks, one overwhelming sense reminded him of the horrors he had stored in his apartment. Laura's remains were decaying, and the smell which emanated was nauseating to be around. And so, in the middle of the winter night, and under cover of darkness, he loaded up both suitcases into his car. They stayed in his car for months, but in June of 2014, Stephen found a quiet, overgrown road outside of Geneva in Wisconsin. He threw the suitcases into the underbrush, hoping that would be the end of his problems. But however, in a stroke of luck, and much to his dismay, the road would be freshly maintained by local highway workers just a few days later. Back to legal proceedings, Stephen's home was searched and multiple articles of evidence were seized. This included his refrigerator, several items of clothing, and of course his bondage gear. From physical evidence right through to confession, authorities now believed they finally had enough evidence to try him for murder and concealment of a corpse. Court proceedings were fragmented. No one believed he had accidentally killed Laura or Jenny, and a lot of them thought he was potentially a serial killer. Obvious to say, but you don't accidentally kill someone just to hide their body and do it all over again several months later. In 2016, Stephen pleaded guilty to the murder of Jenny Gamez, and therefore received 35 years behind bars for her death. The following year, in March 2017, he also pleaded guilty to the murder of Laura Simonson. This gave him an extra 25 years behind bars, with another 10 years for concealing their bodies. This brings Stephen's total sentence to 70 years consecutively, which may as well be a life sentence, as Stephen will never be a free man again. Rightfully so, he had spent many years preying on vulnerable women, and in the process killed 2 of them after. Both women were down on their fortune. Jenny never had a solid upbringing since the age of 5, and despite her misfortunate beginning, she became an ambitious young woman who excelled in her studies and struck out amongst her friends. Laura was a mother of 7 who felt like she had no place in the world. She was grieving, stressed, and lonely without her children. All of these devastating feelings led her to seek affection elsewhere. The world of BDSM is often misunderstood as a community. As mentioned before, it's built on trust, mutual respect, and care. And when practiced healthily, it can be a great space for everyone involved. Stephen's actions don't reflect this community. He's just a selfish, careless, murderous man who refuses to take responsibility for his own actions. He took away 2 innocent lives and permanently scarred many of those around Laura and Jenny. May their family and friends find peace moving forward. Food for thought, but knowing he was up to no good while being a police officer proves he was going downhill while in service. In fact, while being questioned over his misconduct, Stephen even said that it was his job to intimidate, scare, and even stalk people, which is kind of fucked up. And with all investigations being seized after he resigned, it does beg the question, could Stephen's actions have been prevented if he were punished at the time? I'll leave that question up to you to decide, as for me, I'm wrapping up this video here. Thank you so much for watching another video today by Coffeehouse Crime. If you found this case interesting or you learned something new, then please remember to like the video and subscribe if you haven't yet. If you have any questions or thoughts, then please feel free to leave that in the comment section down below. And if you'd like to watch more videos, then please go ahead. But for today, I'm going to leave it there, folks, and I think this will be the one video this week, so I'll be back again next week for another video. Until that moment arrives though, please remember to look after each other and stay safe. Thank you, and goodbye.